guys, I had meant to record us on Tuesday and I forgot to do so. So I've got it recording now, and I'm hoping to record all of our classes. Okay, so welcome. Good to see all of you guys. Can you believe this weather? I will admit, I still prefer it to humidity, but it's still kind of crazy. I have to tell you guys too, today's kind of a cool day. Not Maria, but her oldest sister, Gretchen, turns 25 today. So my first daughter is 25. That's pretty amazing to think about. It makes me both proud and feeling old at the same time. And the other thing that's cool, you guys wouldn't know this, but I wrote a book on Christian humanism, but I looked at the Christian humanism of Russell Kirk, and that book came out 10 years ago today. So kind of a cool anniversary. So I just had to share that with you guys. So fun stuff. Okay, I had told you when we started talking on Thursday that we're going to get into some depressing stuff. And I want to do that now. And I want to get through that as quickly as we can. But I think it's really important to give a context to what's going on. And I think what we see when we're thinking about Christian humanism is that it almost always, even if it's not left-wing or right-wing, it is always reactionary in some way. That is, it's reacting to other things, and it's trying to put us back on a proper path, on a Christian path, trying to remind us of what our Christian roots are and come back to that. And so that's why last Tuesday, 2 days ago, I wanted to start with just trying to give a definition for what's going on with Christian humanism. But I also want to note that it tends to be a very reactionary force. It looks at things in the world, says things are not where they should be, and so it tries to recenter us. And this is what, and some of you may be familiar with this, but this is what Plato in his philosophy called an anamnesis. And an anamnesis means to re-remember or to remember again. And that's what's going on with Christian humanism. It is always a way of thinking that forces us to go back to the natural law. It forces us to go back to a proper definition of the human person. It forces us to remember what had gone wrong. And so this is what I want to state today, and I'm going to sound reactionary myself, but I still, regardless of what label you guys want to give me, I think that it's really important that we talk about these things and talk about what's gone wrong with the world really over the last 150 to 200 years, a little more than that actually. I would say really going back to the French Revolution, things started going very, very seriously wrong in Western civilization. And, I'll just throw out a kind of wild idea, but I think a true one as well. Let's talk about just one of our great ills in society. I think one of the worst aspects of modern society, and it's gotten much worse as I've gotten older, is the aspect of racism. The idea that we would ever judge a person by the color of their skin. I mean, let's just think about that logically for a moment. It's utterly ridiculous. I mean, you just have to have an ounce of reasonableness to recognize that looking at someone because of the color of their skin and judging them by it is absurd. It makes no sense. It's clearly just a prejudice that has no basis in nature. It has no basis in our understanding of one another. And yet there it is, it exists. And we know that in the modern world, and it's not just limited to white people, it's not just white people judging black people, but black people judging white people. If you've been at all watching Michelle Obama's book tour right now, she's just lambasted whites. And it's embarrassing. It's totally racist. And it's amazing to see that and to see what's going on. And yet, if we look at the ancient world, you guys think about everything you've had to study here at Hillsdale. We can go back to Homer, or we can go back to Virgil, or to Ovid, or to Tacitus, or to Horace. Doesn't matter. We go back to any ancient text in Western civilization, not a single one of them ever condemns another person for their skin color. It doesn't exist. You can search through every ancient document available, and there is absolutely zero evidence that racism ever existed at all. Now, you find prejudice. There's no doubt about that. You find hate. You find anger. But that anger, and not surprising given what we talked about on Tuesday, that anger always has to do with religion. And you oppose people who oppose your religion, but you don't oppose people because their skin's a little bit darker or a little bit lighter. It just doesn't exist. And yet we know that racism exists everywhere in the modern world. So I would make this statement, and you can agree or disagree with me on this, but I think it's a legitimate argument. Racism is a disease of modernity. We don't find it in the ancient or the medieval world. We only find it in the modern West. And it's a serious sin. This is not a minor sin. We either love all beings created in the image of God or we don't. And clearly God made black people, and he made brown people, and he made yellow people, and he made red people, and he made white people. And so this is God's pleasure. This is God's desire to do this. And anytime we're racist, we're sinning because we're slapping God in the face for his creation. So I want us to think about that. And it's a hard question then. Where does this prejudice come from? And it is actually logical that we would oppose those people who oppose our God. That's logical. It does make sense. I'm not saying it's good, but it actually is logical that, for example, a Christian would be wary of a Muslim or a Muslim wary of a Jew. That, I can understand that. That's logical. There's something about that again, I'm not saying it's right or good, but we can understand it. It seems natural. But the idea that we would argue, okay, this person is differently complected than I am, that's bizarre. And so that's what I want to get at. And I want us to wrestle with that. That's a hard question. But I want us to wrestle with that this semester and try and think about, well, where do those sins come from? Because I actually don't think they're rooted in nature. And, I can say this having 7 kids. None of my kids, as little kids, were in any way, shape, or form racist. They met another kid who didn't look like them, and they just wanted to be friends. That's all they care about. That they're friends. And it's really not until they're about 7 or 8 that they even realize that kid is somehow different from them. But at 4 and 5, 3, 4, 5, there's no recognition of that at all, in any way, shape, or form. And even when they did recognize it, it's not a problem. It's just, okay, that's unusual, that's interesting. And so we see that over and over again. So this is what the argument I want to make, and that is, I don't think racism is inherent to our humanity at all. I think it's a perversion of our humanity, and somewhere along the way we picked up this sinful thing. And it's been there now for about 600 years, no doubt about that. But again, we can't find it in 500 BC. In fact, I would even go this far, and you guys, if you remember back to your Western heritage, all of Greek philosophy from the beginning, go back to our earliest year for Greek philosophy is about 510 BC, where all these guys are debating at Miletus. And this will be really important when we get to T.S. Eliot. But notice all of those Greek philosophers, they're trying to find out what makes all of us human. That's their goal. Their whole goal of Greek philosophy is to find what is universally true for all humans. Now, again, I don't want to suggest that they were blind to color. We even find, in ancient texts, the Ethiopians are often regarded as kind of innocent. That is, they're almost seen as unfallen human beings. But when they're written about, they're always the people that the gods like to drink with. So it's not like that's a bad prejudice. It's a pretty interesting prejudice that you want to party with the Ethiopians. So I think that's really interesting as we think about what all of this means. So let me break this down. I asked you guys to read The Abolition of Man, and hopefully you got through it. If you didn't get through all of it yet, that's okay. But hopefully you got through a fairly good chunk of it. And I also sent you guys on Tuesday a number of handouts. And I don't know if you had a chance to look at those things, but I want to just start with the first one that I gave you, at least first in my mind. And that was, and I hope you didn't print off the whole thing. It was only actually the first page that I wanted you to look at. But it was the text from Romano Guardini from his book on education. The whole thing's really good. It's beautiful. But it's really the first page that I want to break down. And so let's talk about this in categories and think about what do we mean in modernity? Where does this come from? So let's break this down to a couple of categories. The first thing I want to try to understand is what do we mean by the term modernity? This is not, and I hope you guys all know this is not the same thing as saying modern times. It sounds like it should be, but it's not. Modernity is a specific philosophical concept about a part of the present. And when we're talking about modernity in Western civilization, we usually mean a time period, short, but really important. We mean a time period that goes sometime from the 1870s up through World War I. It's also at times what we would call progressivism or the progressive period. And after World War I, arguments are that we actually enter into what we might call post-modernity. And so those are difficult concepts, but I want to try and break them down and see specifically what they mean and what's happening in terms of modernity and post-modernity. The best definition I've ever seen is this first page of what we have from Romano Guardini. Guardini, you guys may not know, and it's totally fine if you don't. He's going to be an important figure for our class. Guardini was an Italian, but he moved to Germany when he was a very little boy. And so even though at home he spoke Italian with his parents, he's actually raised as a German. And he's in the anti-Nazi underground. He's fighting Hitler throughout all of the 30s and the 40s. He then emerges at the end of World War II. He's a Roman Catholic priest. He emerges as one of the great social philosophers of the post-war world. And so he has a huge reputation, and he is especially all through the 50s and the 60s. He is really considered the leader of German youth. The youth of Germany, people your age, just adore Guardini. They buy all of his books, they follow him around, and again, he's a priest, but he's this very, very charismatic priest. And probably the person who's most important for us that he influences is Pope Benedict. When Benedict is Karl Ratzinger before he becomes Pope, he's very taken with Guardini, and especially with Guardini's social philosophy. So this guy really does matter for us. And he's also very influential on Russell Kirk, Eric Voegelin, a number of other figures that we'll talk about this semester, some really important people. So if you guys have this in front of you, let's just look through it. If you don't have it, no worries. But if you do have it, and by the way, this is a good friend of mine, Father Nesty, was able to get me a copy of this. This is still not copyrighted in America because this was a guy's dissertation who was translating Guardini, never been published in America. So you have a rare copy of this. Most of Guardini's other books have been published, but not this one. So look what he says right at the beginning there. The way in which the spirit of the modern age evolved can be considered in the light of the dissolution of the worldview that prevailed during the Middle Ages. Now, I'm going to be a little bit more ecumenical than Guardini is here for a moment, because I want to incorporate Protestantism as well. Guardini, as a Roman Catholic, is clearly quite taken with the Catholic Middle Ages. That's understandable. And his best book, my favorite book, is this book called The End of the Modern World. And it'll have a huge influence on Tolkien, others, and I'll get to that, I don't know if today, but we will get to it at some point in this semester. And the argument that Guardini makes, Drew, you may remember this from Heritage, because I don't know if I told you it was Guardini, but I was taking it from Guardini. The thing that Guardini says is that we can break the world down really into three parts. That is the Western world. We can break it down in the ancient, the medieval, and the modern. And he says it's really interesting that when we look at Western man, if we look to the Greeks, and Guardini's a specialist on Socrates, so that's his philosophical training, is Socratic philosophy. He says this really interesting thing about who and what we are. He says that in the ancient world, we are so active. We are constantly moving from place to place. We are always trying to find out what we would call justice. That is, to give each person his due. And so as ancient Western men and women, we were constantly seeking our place in the universe. Do we belong to Athens? Do we belong to the Jews? Do we belong to Christ? And I want you guys to know this, and I hope this is pretty clear. Any of you who have had the chance to study Paul's letter to the Romans, it is a very restless, very beautiful look at where our citizenship resides. That's what Romans is about. Do you belong to the natural law? Do you belong to the Jews? Do you belong to the body of Christ? Do you belong to secular governments, right? Romans 13. It's all this deep investigation of our citizenship. And ironically, even though it's written to the Romans, I would argue that it's Paul's most Greek text, because it's a very Greek question. Where do we belong? And so for Guardini, there is always an unfulfilled restlessness in the ancient world. Man doesn't know his gods. He doesn't know his citizenship. He's loose. And there's a beauty to that, because he's always exploring, right? Ancient man is just looking everywhere, but can't anchor himself anywhere. And so ancient man is always, for Guardini, a moving target. Christian man, and for Guardini that means medieval man, but I'm going to take it a little bit farther, and I'm going to say Luther and Calvin too, for the sake of argument. So Protestant man is early Protestant man, and especially Catholic man. I'm going to put them together for the sake of argument. I'm not sure that's what Guardini would approve, but I'm going to make the argument anyway. And that is, when we look at Christian man is the only being ever in our history who knew who he was. He's the only one. Nobody else in the history of Western civilization has ever understood themselves. So only Christian man has known who he was. And why? Because based on Paul and the City of God by St. Augustine, Christian man always knew he was not made for this world. He was made for the next world. And so he could suffer, and he could know that this world is really short, and it's brutish, and it's nasty, and that's okay, because we're getting ready for the next world. And so think about this, and guys, just imagine this. And Drew, I apologize, because I know you heard all of this so recently, but just think about this. Imagine we walk into Walmart. You just walked into Walmart. There's some guy sitting there who greets us, "Welcome to Walmart." We walk in. And what do we see? We see colorful things everywhere. And all we need is the milk. And how do we get to the milk? Every grocery store always puts the milk at the farthest point from the entrance. Always. Because, of course, they want you to see as much of their product as possible to go get the milk. And so it's just this cornucopia of delights. Oh, there's this whiskey and this beer, and there's this cheese, and there's this, all the way through. And notice what Walmart wants you to do. The last thing they want you to do is to look up, because the ceiling is hideous. They don't want you to see that. They want you to be dazzled. And they have those monitors, Walmart TV, everywhere, and they're playing, Led Zeppelin, but they're doing it in a tapioca music. And so everything is meant to just dull your senses except for the products. That's capitalism. I have no problem with it. But now walk up to a medieval cathedral. And what do? The first thing you do when you walk to a medieval cathedral is you look up. And you look up to the spire, and you look up to the cross at the top of the spire. And around the top of the spire are gargoyles like you've never seen before. All these crazy little fairy creatures everywhere. And the whole point of the medieval cathedral is to take you out of this world and look to the heavens. Exactly the opposite of Walmart. Exactly. And that's what Guardini says is genius about medieval man. They are content in their suffering. And there's a beauty to that. And they're not surprised when they walk around the countryside and they see fairies, or they see angels, or they see saints with halos around their head. That's normal for medieval man. That would be totally bizarre for us if we walked into Walmart and we saw someone with kind of a radiance around their head. That would just be bizarre to us. But it wasn't to medieval man. And so Guardini's argument is that Christian man is the only person who has ever been centered in Western civilization. And again, why? Because they know they're pilgrims. They are not made for this world. They are made for eternity. Does that make sense for everyone? You don't have to agree with it, but I want you to understand Guardini's argument. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And again, I would extend it into the early Reformation as well, that there's just this kind of mystery of life that Christians really imbibe, that they understand. And one of the reasons I say that is, it's not surprising if any of you have ever read, it's a horror story, but if you've ever read Young Goodman Brown by Nathaniel Hawthorne, it's not shocking that a Puritan would walk into the forest and see mystical creatures and see saints and see witches and those kinds of things. It's not just Catholic. You see that there as well in Puritan culture, and definitely in Lutheran culture. And I'll tell you guys, and you can believe this or not, but my grandmother, my maternal mother, I loved her dearly. Gilletta was her name. She didn't even speak English. She only spoke German until she was in her 30s. Had a little bit of English in school, but didn't speak it until she was in her 30s. And she always had a hilarious, in fact, this was terrible. I teased her mercilessly about her German accent. She could never get pronouns right because it was whatever the German pronoun was. So our dog Molly was always a boy. It's like, no, Grandma, Molly's a girl, but every pronoun, because dogs always have a masculine pronoun. It was a boy. But my grandmother, I loved her dearly. Best cook I've ever met. So wise. But she firmly believed that when she was a kid, they would go out, and she was the oldest of 17 kids. They would go out in the farm, and they would watch the angels, the fairies, dance across the wheat fields. Yeah, Grandma, are you sure? Oh yeah, totally sure. Yeah, not a question about it. And frankly, if anyone could do it, my grandma could. But there's just something, and she still had that old Christian understanding. Yeah, it's the next world that matters. And even her death, 2003, I still remember her death. She was sitting on her bed, dying, in good health up until the day she died. She was going blind and deaf, but she was in pretty good health. Otherwise, her body was in good health. She was in her 90s, but still in pretty good health. But she was dying that day. And my mom, who's a talker, is on one side of her, and the parish priest is on the other side of her. And my mom and the priest just start talking. And they kind of ignore my grandma because, there's grandma just laying there. And so mom and the priest are talking. And suddenly my grandma reaches up and grabs my mom's hand and says, "Rita, it's time." And she starts saying the Lord's Prayer. "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." And at that moment, my grandma died. It's pretty cool, right? That's pretty amazing. That's a great way to go. I would love to have a death like that. It's just incredible. So, that's what Guardini is getting at. This recognition that there's something so beautiful that's manifested here, but it's only a glimpse of reality. And reality is out there. Reality is above and beyond us only by God's grace. So Guardini then says, well, all right, what about modern man? And here's the problem of modern man and the problem of modernity. We love to categorize people. They are white. They are black. They are Asian. They are American Indian. They are from Botswana. Whatever it may be, we love to categorize. There's Generation X. There's the millennials. There's the boomers. Right? We love that. And what we do without even meaning to is we take every person we know and we put them in a little box. And so why should we be surprised in modernity that we have racism? Racism's just another way of putting a person in a box. And that's what Guardini says. And he tells us that just like the Greeks, we are utterly, utterly restless. Unlike the Greeks, we're not trying to find out what makes us universally human. We're trying to narrow and narrow and narrow our definition of the human person. And so we keep splitting man from himself over and over again. And yet, the Greeks had their gods. We don't even have our gods. We've pretty much given up our faith. Not us in this room, but the vast majority of Americans. So not surprisingly, what do we care about? Do we care about getting communion on Sunday? No. We care about getting the latest iteration of the iPhone. That's become our God. We chase after, and there's nothing wrong with this thing at all. In and of itself, it's beautiful. It's my camera. I can talk to my kids. I can see my kids. I can check my flight. I can order the latest book from Amazon. I mean, I am carrying around a miracle in my pocket. But is that really the new God? And yet that's what Romano Guardini says. And he makes this further argument that I want you guys to know, and we're going to talk about this more later. For Guardini, technology can always be judged by one thing. Does it make us more human or less human? That's how we always judge our technology. So does it make us more human or less human? And we'll get into that later in the semester. But I want you guys to know that now as we're thinking about Guardini. Okay, so again, let's go back to him. Unless anybody has a question about him. Okay, yeah, Hugh.
Yeah, was he a contemporary of von Hildebrand? Because you mentioned
yes,
resistance, and I know that von Hildebrand was very pivotal in that movement.
Yes, definitely. And again, they all would have regarded themselves as Christian humanists. And even if their politics were a little different, this transcends that, right? Absolutely transcends it. So that's why they're thinking. And again, modernity, what do we think of when we think of modernity? We think of Nazism, we think of communism, we think of excessive consumerism, all of those things that are materialist and diminish us in some way. Okay, so Guardini, thanks you. Guardini, the way in which the spirit of the modern age evolved can be considered in the light of the dissolution of the worldview that prevailed during the Middle Ages. No longer does the unity of the different spheres of man's existence and of his activities seem obvious, a matter of course. Man begins to hesitate moving from one sphere to another, from the domain of faith to that of human culture, from the field of ethics to that of aesthetics, from philosophy to politics. There is no longer found the somewhat naive ease by which criteria valid in one sphere were transferred to another, by which the results obtained in one area were taken uncritically into another. And let's just pause for a moment. We're at a college that's deeply, deeply medieval in its structure. The liberal arts are meant to pull us all together. But think about how different the terminology is in an econ class versus a history class. That's what Guardini is getting at here. In other words, one of my best friends is Yvonne Pongrasic. We get economists. We get together every Friday at 2, no matter what. We always get a coffee, and we talk for an hour and a half to 2 hours. We often, more often than not, agree with each other. But almost every time we disagree, it's because our terminology is not the same. He's speaking as an economist. I'm speaking as a historian. We argue, and then we step back and say, oh, but if I accept your definition, you're right. And that's what Guardini is getting at. There was this ease. And we're all individuals. So we're radically different from one another. But we all share our humanity. But if we start defining ourselves by our differences, oh, I'm a transgender Somali, well, at that point, you're exaggerating who and what you are. Or, and I'll give a more controversial example. I don't know how many of you guys saw the new season of Stranger Things, but there's a moment, and I love Stranger Things, but there's a moment where one of the main characters gives an 11-minute speech on why he's gay. Okay, I can accept that for the story. But then the actor went out and said, well, being gay is my superpower. I thought, oh, you blew it. It was fine up to that point. But to actually take your one difference and exaggerate that to the point of your identity, nah, doesn't work. It doesn't work in your sexuality. It doesn't work in your politics. It doesn't work in your race. No, you're either human or you're not. And those other things are interesting, but they're not what defines us. It's that which defines us that matters most. So again, Dr. Pongrasic and I get together. We have different language, and yet we find common ground, because ultimately it's about two guys sitting together and talking, not an economist and a historian, but two men, right? That's what really matters overall. So each sphere tends to find its own roots in itself, seeking what especially sets it apart from all the other spheres. Each sphere seeks its own specific meaning and purpose, its own basic values, its own authentic standards of validity, and its corresponding norms by which all efforts in this sphere are determined. That is, it seeks its own critically pure methods. Understanding culture in its broad sense as the embodiment of what man creates and himself becomes in this living encounter with the surrounding world, the autonomy of the various spheres of culture is at issue. An autonomy first vaguely felt, then becoming more demanding, seeking its theoretical foundation. Thus, the different spheres grow apart from each other according to their subject and mode of operating, their constitutive value and specific method. This often is accompanied by severe struggles tainted by an attitude irreligious in fact or in appearance, breaking asunder sacred claims of order and tradition. The specific character of each domain is consistently emphasized with ever-grading one-sidedness and persistence, as seems the rule with contradictory human nature. The specific area begin to emerge. The specific areas begin to emerge. Science recognizes nothing except that which arises in methodical consequence from the quest for truth within its own sphere. Art, there is nothing except that which serves truth within its own sphere. There is nothing except that which serves exclusively the realization of aesthetic values, the perfection of expression and form. Politics has no aim but to maintain and increase the power and welfare of the state. In commercial life, no standard and value are acknowledged which do not lead to the maximum in production and to the saturation with material goods. Ethics, as a pure doing good for the sake of good, grows without taking into account any of the religious or secular concerns. Each domain asserts itself so emphatically that the unifying view of the whole is lost before the domain's claim to autonomy. And that's modernity. Modernity is the breaking down of these parts. And I know you're not all Catholic, and that's totally fine. But just imagine, think about what we call communion. Communion. We become one in the body of Christ. Again, whether that's your theology or not, work with it for the argument for a moment. We become one with the body of Christ. And that's what matters. So absolutely, I'm still Brad. I'm still 58. I'm still a white male. I still am an English speaker. I'm still the son of Harry and Rita. Those things do not change. But what matters is that I'm human. That's what matters. And that I'm made in the image of God. I'm a unique expression of God, but I'm still made in his image. And that's what medieval man got so right. So black, white, male, female, Greek, Jew. If you think about St. Paul, right, in Galatians, none of that matters. We're one in Christ. That's what matters. And again, it doesn't mean, I look at my daughter Maria. Now, she's a 21-year-old female. That matters. That matters. But she's also a human being. And that also gives us a sense of who gives us a sense of who and what we are. Right? So that's that expression. So what does modernity say? Modernity says, let's take Maria and break her down into all of her constituent parts. And in the end, what are we left with? A set of chemicals, a body that's maybe worth on the scientific market a few cents. Well, that's ridiculous. She's so much more than that because there's a dignity to who and what she is. So modernity is always trying to compartmentalize who and what we are. And think about postmodernity. What do we do in postmodernity? We say things like, well, that's my ideology. That's who I am. You have your ideology, and that's who you are. It's an absolute sin because it breaks us down into a few ideas or a few expressions. And that's why I think for your generation, dealing with all of this identity dysphoria, it's insane how we break people down into those categories. And again, think about that young man in Stranger Things. Being gay is my superpower. Well, I'm not going to comment on whether he's gay or not, But I am going to comment on the idea that that would be his identity. That's insane. I mean, can you imagine if I sat around and bragged about being heterosexual and therefore that's who I am? That's insane. That's a part of me. Of course, I've got 7 kids, but that's not me. It's just part of the human condition. And so that's what we have to think about and recognize those things. Okay, you guys have any questions about modernity? So modernity and its great sin is it's always coming down to a basic thing. Now, I'm going to take this further, and I'm going to suggest, I'm not going to do it now because I want to get to Lewis, but I'm also going to suggest that when we look at the entire 19th century project intellectually, it's already all modernistic in the sense that you have people like Karl Marx, who's a genius. I disagree with almost everything he believed, but he's certainly one of the greatest thinkers of the last century, 2 centuries ago, right? But think about what he said. Everything's economic. Well, that's crazy. Not everything's economic. Sure, if I go into the grocery store and I look at this brand of bread versus this brand of bread and I judge that they're of equal quality, I'm going to go with the cheaper one. It's economic. There's no doubt about that. But my love for Maria has no economic value at all in any way, shape, or form. Would it have that? And she's got a wedding coming up. Well, we're going to spend money on that wedding. Why? Not because I'm a penny pincher, but because I'm her dad, right? So that's how we think about those things. Or you think about someone like Darwin, everything's biological. Well, again, I've got 7 kids. I know how biology works, but that's not all I am. That's not all I am at all. When I go to church and I take communion, I'm not thinking about the biological implications of Christ or his body. I'm thinking about a spiritual element at that point. And so that's the real problem in the 19th century. They break everything down into its constituent parts. They don't realize how beautiful the whole is. Okay, here's the second thing I want to talk about. And this is only since the French Revolution. A brand new term. A term that had never existed before in human history. A term called ideology. And ideology's strange origins are this. If you guys look back at the French Revolution, it was brutal. But one of the most authoritarian manifestations of the French Revolution was Napoleon. Napoleon coming forth on a white horse and reining in the excesses of the murdering French. He's still evil, don't get me wrong, but he's a better evil than the evil that he replaced. And when Napoleon comes in, he says, oh yeah, those guys over there, they're ideologues. He's the first to coin this term. And it's a joke because he means that they're the people who believe in the science of idiocy. That's where ideology originally comes from. It means the science of idiocy. And so we, in 2026, have to be very careful because quite often we've perverted this word where we say things like, well, there's Hugh or there's Drew, and whatever their system of beliefs is, that's their ideology. That is not what ideology means. That might be a worldview or a personal psychology or personal philosophy. It is not an ideology. An ideology, by definition, is an inverted religion. An ideology is an attempt to create a whole picture out of a minor truth. So this is where C.S. Lewis, and you saw this in Abolition of Man, what is an ideology? It is to explode a truth to madness. So ideologies are not false. They are deeply, deeply, deeply wrong, but they're not false. And let me give you an example. I think a good example, the kind of example that someone like Lewis would understand. Think about communism. The entire heart of communism is to love one's community. It's a beautiful thing. We should all love our community. Think about fascism. At the heart of fascism, we should love our nation. There's nothing wrong with either of those things. But if I love my nation so much that I round up 6 million people and execute them because they don't quite fit my image of what my nation is, I have committed a horrendous evil in every way. And of course, that's what Hitler did with the Jews. If I love my community so much that I execute 62 million of them in the gulag, I have committed a very serious sin. And so that's why when we think about these things, am I economic? Yeah. Am I biological? Yeah. Do I love my community? Yes. Do I love my nation? Yes. Am I psychological? Yes. Am I sexual? Yes. Am I spiritual? Yes. And I'm about a billion other things I will never fully comprehend. But the problem of ideology and the problem of modernity is it takes a truth and explodes it to madness. That's C.S. Lewis's, those are his words. And that's the problem. And so there is, in my understanding of this, and Lewis's understanding, there is no such thing as a good ideology. Even a well-intentioned ideology is an abomination. So if I make my ideology capitalism, or if I make it consumerism, it's not as bad as communism, but it'll still be bad because it denigrates the wholeness of the human person. It denigrates that. It breaks it apart. So let's go ahead, if you guys don't mind. And you guys know you can interrupt anytime. Anytime you guys have a question or a thought, don't hesitate to challenge me or to bring something else in. All right, let's look at Lewis. I know we don't all have the same edition, but if you guys would, pull the one out that you have. I had told you guys to skip through most of the first chapter, and totally fine if you did, and to pick it up at the end. But I do want to look at a couple of things en route to it, and especially to get right to the last few pages of this. So for my edition, it's on page 24, and it starts with the paragraph, let's see, it's 1, 2, 3 paragraphs from the end of the chapter. So from the end of the first chapter, 3 paragraphs.
It is to their credit.
It starts, but this course, though less inhuman. Anybody want to read?
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. Remind me of your name again.
I'm Jonathan.
Jonathan, thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem. But this course, though less inhuman, is not less disastrous than the opposite alternative of cynical propaganda. Let us suppose for a moment that the harder virtues could really be theoretically justified, with no appeal or to objective value. It still remains true that no justification of virtue will enable a man to be virtuous. Without the aid of trained emotions, the intellect is powerless against the animal organism. I had sooner play cards against a man who was quite skeptical about ethics, but bred to believe that a gentleman does not cheat, than against an irreproachable moral philosopher who had been brought up among sharpers. I do not know what that means.
Oh, a card sharp is someone who cheats.
Oh.
Yeah.
In battle, it is not syllogisms that will keep the reluctant nerves and muscles to their post in the third hour of the bombardment. The crudest sentimentalism, such as Gaius and Titius would wince at, about a flag or a country or a regiment, will be of more use, were it told it all long ago by Plato. We were told it all long ago by Plato. As the king governs by his executive, so reason in man must rule the mere appetites by means of a spirited element. The head rules the belly through the chest, the seat, as Alamus tells us, of magnanimity, of emotions organized by trained habit into stable sentiments. The chest magnanimity sentiment, these are the indispensable liaison officers between cerebral man and visceral man. It may even be said that it is by this middle element that a man is man, for by his intellect he is mere spirit, and by his appetite mere animal.
Okay, let's stop there for a second. Thanks, Jonathan. Nice job. Okay, this is very complicated, and I want you guys to know this, where Lewis is coming from in his argumentation. So notice what he says. As the king governs by his executive, so reason, capital R, in man must rule the mere appetites by means of the spirited element. The head rules the belly through the chest. Okay, now this is where it gets really, really complicated. But it's not. Once you get it, you get it. This is deeply Platonic and Aristotelian. It is also deeply Stoic, and consequently, it becomes deeply Christian. So, it's Platonic and Aristotelian, Stoic and Christian. This is what Lewis means by this, and it's beautiful. Again, once you get it, it makes perfect sense. So I want you guys to look at me for a moment. I apologize for that because I realize I'm not the best specimen, but I am human. All right, so look at me and think about what he says. The belly rules the head through the appetites, right? Well, actually, let me get that right. The head rules the belly through the chest. Okay, the head rules the belly through the chest. This is how it's broken down. And again, just look at me for a moment. This is the monarchy. It is your executive. In America, it is the president. Doesn't always work that way, but that's the goal. So the head is the intellect. The stomach and the procreative regions are our appetites. That is democracy. That is mob rule. That is our animalistic side. I see someone, we'll put it in my marriage, my wife, and I lust after her. It's okay if it's my wife, right? So I lust after her. It's not a rational decision. I don't think, tonight would be, you guys get the image, right? It's wow, she looks great tonight. It's lustful. All right, totally fine within marriage, right? Not a problem. But notice how I'm ruled. It's not my intellect doing it, and it's not my soul. Okay, so what's that middle part for? And this is where, remember what he said, it's what makes man man. And he's already told us what this chapter is called, Men Without Chests. So there's something about our chest that matters. So if the head is the executive and the monarchy, and the stomach is our democracy or the House of Representatives, then our chest is our aristocracy. It is the Senate or the Supreme Court, or maybe the House of Lords versus our stomach, which is the House of Commons. And so the whole idea of our Constitution is Aristotelian and Platonic and Stoic and Christian. The whole thing, because it is based on an understanding of the human person, which is why a republic is not a democracy, it is not a monarchy, and it is not an aristocracy. But if it is to function, it must have all three of those parts within it. Again, our Constitution, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. That's where that comes from. Does that make sense for everyone? I'm going to complicate this a little bit more, but does that make sense? Okay, so what is reason then? Why is it in the chest? Reason is this crazy thing. Reason, and this is where we have to be very careful, we've perverted the word. In 2026, if I say that's reasonable, I mean that my rationality has said it's okay. That is not the ancient or medieval understanding of reason. Reason is not in any way, shape, or form synonymous with rationality. Rationality is, I walk into the grocery store and through cost-benefit analysis, I decide that this loaf of bread is better than this loaf of bread. My passions are, woman beautiful, would like to be with her. That's my passion versus my head. It's the chest that says, what would Jesus do? When Plato first defines reason, he says, it is a form of divine madness. It is divine madness. Why? Because it is God next to myself. So this is the irony about reason. Reason is the least human thing about us because it is God projecting himself into us. It is the spotless mirror from Scripture. Yet it is, and this is the irony, it's the paradox, reason is the thing that is least human about us. It is the thing that makes us most human. So think about when St. John writes his gospel. In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was the Word. And what is the Word? John 1:9. It is the light that lighteth up every man. In other words, my soul is beautiful. No matter how corrupt I make it, it is beautiful because it reflects the divine. It is the temple of the Holy Spirit. It reflects Christ. That's what makes it beautiful, not by anything that I can do. There is nothing I can do to make my soul beautiful. Only Christ does. And now think about this. You guys forgive me. I'm going to be really Catholic about this, but you'll understand the argument. Think about what happens when Gabriel, the archangel, goes to Mary and asks her to be the handmaid of the Lord. Notice her response. My soul doth magnify the Lord. Mary's not making it about herself, which is what's so beautiful about her submission. Her submission is 100% about God, not about herself. She gives herself over completely, and what does her soul do? It magnifies the Lord. That's incredible, right? And again, I know I sound really Catholic about that, but I think even if you're not Catholic, you get what that means. That idea of pure submission. Mary gives herself over completely. That's what C.S. Lewis is getting at. This is the irony. It's our chest, men and women, it's our chest that makes us most human. Why? Because that's what reflects the divine. Think about my mind. And he says this. He says this right at the end of the paragraph of what Jonathan read. It may even be said that it is by this middle element that man is man. For by his intellect, he is pure spirit. He's robotic. A computer can do what my mind can do. It's what a computer is. It's an imitation of the mind. But my stomach, remember, I'm hungry, I lust after her. That is what animals do. Totally a part of who I am. But it's the lowest part of who I am. Absolutely. And the irony again is that what makes us most human is this thing in the middle, but it makes it that it's higher than our brain, even though physically it's not. The highest part of ourselves, not physically, but the highest part of ourselves metaphysically is the soul. That's, or the heart, however you want to define it. That's what really makes us human. And again, if you want to think about it from a Christian standpoint, it is John 1:9, the light that lighteth up every man. And so there, and I hope you guys realize, I'm trying to tie this all into Tuesday's lecture. This is what it means to be human. To be fully human is to live as Christ would. That's Christian humanism, right there. To live as Christ would. So that's a really, I think, beautiful way of putting this and what Lewis is getting at here. So Lewis is fundamentally a Christian humanist, right? In this one long paragraph that Jonathan just read, more than anything else, we see that. And what happens if I remove the chest? If I remove my belief in God, I don't become more human. I become less human. So those atheists running around who call themselves humanists, and in the name of humanity, the irony is they've diminished themselves. They have exited humanity, not embraced it. Only the Christian or the religious person, could be a Jew, right? Don't get me wrong. But only those who embrace their religion and embrace God become fully human. That's the point of this. And again, I don't want us to be bigoted. In our charity, we must acknowledge other religions as well. We may not put them at the same level as Christianity, but we still recognize the common humanity and the goal there in our charity. Okay, Jonathan, do you mind reading a little more?
Absolutely. Just right where I left off.
Yeah, the operation of the Green Book.
The operation of the Green Book and its kind is to produce what may be called men without chests. It is an outrage that they should be commonly spoken of as intellectuals. This gives them the chance to say that he who attacks them attacks intelligence. It is not so. They are not distinguished from other men by any unusual skill in finding truth, nor any virginal ardor to pursue her. Instead, it would be strange if they were. A persevering devotion to truth, a nice sense of intellectual honor, cannot be maintained without the aid of a sentiment which Gaius and Titius would debunk as easily as any other. It is not excess of thought, but defect of fertile and generous emotion that marks them out. Their heads are no bigger than the ordinary. It is the atrophy of the chest beneath that makes them seem so.
You guys get that image, right? That's hilarious, right? They look big-headed because they have no chests. So of course they look, and that's an intellectual, right? I would never want to be called an intellectual. A scholar, yeah, but not an intellectual, right? I don't want that kind of moniker for me. That's terrible. Who wants that? I want to be a full man, not just a head. And if you guys have had a chance, well, who in here has read That Hideous Strength? Yeah, I mean, think about what the unman is. He is just a head, right? Right? It makes perfect sense when you get it, but that's all he is. He's the head. So for those of you who haven't read it, I'm actually jealous. I would love to read that book for the first time again. It's just so good. But great science fiction, but it also is an expression of this. Okay, Jonathan, finish us off there.
And all the time, such is the tragicomedy of our situation, we continue to clamor for those very qualities we are rendering impossible. You can hardly open a periodical without coming across the statement that what our civilization needs is more drive or dynamism or self-sacrifice or creativity. In a sort of ghastly simplicity, we remove the organ and demand the function. We make men without chests and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the geldings to be fruitful.
Hilarious. I mean, and remember, Lewis gave these as lectures, right? And they're lectures that he's giving in the middle of World War II. So, and he's the voice of Britain. He's absolutely the voice of Britain. He's the voice of the BBC throughout World War II. And the two most common voices you would have heard during World War II, Winston Churchill and C.S. Lewis. Right, that if you're British, right, that's what you hear. And so these are being broadcast on the BBC. You're sitting in your kitchen and you're worried about your sons across the straits in Europe fighting. And here's Lewis saying, well, let's think about virtue, right? And they're worrying about their kids. And he's saying, and of course, what is he getting at here? It's the point, well, if we defeat the Nazis and become them, well, then they've still won. And so we got to make sure that we're fighting for really good things. If your son's going to die, May he die for truth and goodness. Let's make it worth something, not just another body count, but something more than that, something that can be beautiful and patriotic and real and meaningful. So it's a reminder. But I hope you guys also see, even in his wit, Lewis is completely condemning the modern world. Right? This idea that we've completely lost this idea of our chest, our soul, because we laugh at it as superstition. But it can't be superstition. All the way back to Plato, it has been recognized as the thing that makes us most human. So yes, it's very Christian. It's also very pagan. And therefore, we can recognize that it's something that transcends just our religious belief. Our religious belief baptized it. But it is a pagan and stoic understanding. Okay, so what Lewis does then, and I think this is genius on his part. Now, Lewis, remember, and I think this is should be common knowledge, outside of John Paul II, Lewis is the greatest popular exponent of Christianity in the 20th century. Right? You've got the Catholic and the Protestant. And I think that's really, really important, that you have that. And if any of you know the great Catholic philosopher, Hans Urs von Balthasar, when he died, and he died as a very poor priest because he gave up everything for charity, he died with his bookshelf next to his head, nothing but Tolkien and Lewis books right there, this devout Catholic having those. And the same thing is true. Pope Benedict loved C.S. Lewis, absolutely loved him and loved Abolition of Man. But notice what Lewis is doing in this book. He doesn't want to come from a Christian perspective. He's fine if you're Christian and agree with him, but he's trying to appeal to everybody within the British Empire. And that, of course, means Hindus, it means pagans in Africa, it means Christians. He's trying to appeal to them all. So turn to the back of the book. What does Lewis do? And by the way, he takes this all from Christopher Dawson. We'll talk more about Dawson. But this is all from a 1929 book by Christopher Dawson called Religion and Culture? I can't remember. It's 1929 Dawson. Dawson was terrible with titles. They all basically sound the same. But he's taking it from that, blatantly taking it from that. And he puts this together. He says, this is the appendix, the illustrations of the Tao, right? Taking that from Asian religion. The following illustrations of the natural law are collected from such sources as come readily to the hand of one who is not a professional historian. The list makes no pretense of completeness. It will be noticed that writers such as Locke and Hooker was the great theologian behind Anglicanism, who wrote within the Christian tradition, are quoted side by side with the New Testament. This would, of course, be absurd if I were not trying to collect independent testimonies to the Tao. And so what do we have? Look to the next page there. When we have these things, well, he starts quoting the ancient Egyptians from the Book of the Dead. He quotes the Jews from Exodus, once again from the ancient Egyptians. And then the Old Norse, he's quoting from Odin? That's kind of wild. Right? And then after that again, ancient Egyptian, and then we get Hindu descriptions, and then Babylonian descriptions, back to Jewish descriptions, and then Hindu descriptions, and Babylonian, and then Chinese from Confucius. And so look what Lewis is brilliantly trying to do here. He's saying it doesn't matter. If we look at Confucianism, or we look at Hinduism, or we look at Judaism, or we look at Christianity, we find, now he's not equivocating, he's not saying they're equal, but he's saying when it comes to their morality, they have found a common source. That is, for those of us who are Christian, we should actually take Confucius pretty seriously. We don't put him up there with Moses or Jesus, but we can recognize that there's something divine in him. Or if we look at the Buddha, right? No, he's not Jesus, but he's not evil. There's something divine in him. Now, none of us woke up this morning and worshiped Thor, even though it's a Thursday, but Thor was the god of justice. Maybe we should take something serious from him. Now, and so what Lewis is doing here, and it's very much an anti-fundamentalist project, whether you're fundamentalist Christian or fundamentalist Muslim, you're not going to agree with this. But he's saying, all right, let's say this. Yeah, Christianity is the true religion, but all of these others, they all point to God in some way or another. And we see that in the Tao. So that's what Lewis is getting at here. And again, no fundamentalist is Lewis. He's Christian, but he's Christian of a philosophical sort. So I want to turn this for me, and we'll finish today. I want to turn to this. He has this description, and we're in chapter 2 now, lecture number 2. He has this description about what the Tao is. And I want to end with this today. For me, this is on page 43. I don't know where it would be for you guys. It looks to me like it's pretty close to the end of the chapter. In fact, I'll just count. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 paragraphs from the end of that chapter. And it starts with, since I can see no answers to these questions, I draw the following conclusion. You guys see that? Hugh, did you find it?
Yes, I found it.
Okay, why don't you read for us?
Since I can see no answer to these questions, I draw the following conclusions. This thing, which I have called for convenience the Tao, and which others may call natural law or traditional morality, or the first principles of practical reason, or the first platitudes, is not one among a series of possible systems of value. It is the sole source of all value judgments. If it is rejected, all value is rejected. If any value is retained, it is retained. The effort to refute it and raise a new system of value in its place is self-contradictory. There has never been and never will be a radically new judgment of value in the history of the world. What purport to be new systems, or as they now call them, ideologies, all consist of fragments from the Tao itself, arbitrarily wrenched from their context in the whole, and then swollen to madness in their isolation. Yet still owing to the Tao, is it Tao or Tao?
It's Tao. It's a D.
Okay.
But that's okay. Don't worry. Not a problem.
Owing to the Tao, and to it alone, such validity as they possess. If my duty to my parents is a superstition, then so is my duty to posterity. If justice is a superstition, then so is my duty to my country or my race. If the pursuit of scientific knowledge is a real value, then so is conjugal fidelity. The rebellion of new ideologies against the Tao is a rebellion of the branches against the tree. If the rebels could succeed, they would find that they had destroyed themselves. The human mind has no more power of inventing a new value than of imagining a new primary color, or indeed of creating a new sun and a new sky for it to move in.
It was great, Hugh. Okay, it's genius. I think about Lewis, who's just summed up the whole problem of modernity. They call these ideologies, but what are they? They are fragments of truth. They're not wrong. They're not lies. They can be, but generally they're not. But they're fragments of truth. And it would be as if I took Nathan and took one quality of him and ignored everything else. I would be dehumanizing him. I'm not looking at the whole person. Do I know the whole person? No. I've known him for 4 years and I know him pretty well. But there are things about himself he doesn't even know. And so how could I know? And that's why we must always approach our fellow human beings in charity and humility. Always, right? Always, in every way. Because can we produce a new ideology? No. We can only produce new lies. That's all they are. And that, I think, is just genius on the part of Lewis. So, what do we know? And I'll finish with this today. Is this uncomfortable for a Christian? It shouldn't be. Paul tells us right at the beginning of Romans that there is a natural law in which even the law is written on the hearts of pagans. They know it, right? So that's all Lewis is drawing from here as well. And now he's trying to explain to us what is that natural law that all peoples have in common, right? And that's brilliant on his part. Again, taking it from Dawson, but just brilliant. Okay, do you guys have any final questions or thoughts? I know, yeah, Jonathan?
Yeah, so the heart being the thing that truly leads and governs all men is and the thing that makes us the most human, and that being both a mixture of the intellectual spirit and the fleshly desires of the stomach. That like has this like two-natured sort of quality, which I can't help but, I guess three natures
Yeah.
too. I can't help relate that to the Trinity or to
Yes.
the incarnation of Jesus.
Absolutely.
Can you speak on that at all?
No, absolutely. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. Absolutely. No, there's no question about that. It's very Trinitarian. And it's based on that idea. I mean, think about how, what is Jesus? Jesus is divine wisdom. What is God? God the Father. What is the Holy Spirit? Divine passion. Right? So that's how we break it down. So no, Jonathan, it's great insight. Really great. And that, I mean, think about this. Plato understood that. He didn't get it right, but he understood that. He pointed in the right direction. That's the natural law. Even Plato could get that. So that's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Okay, guys, next week, go ahead, if you don't mind, bring Abolition of Man one more time. We've just got a little bit more to cover in it. But, and then I'll probably send you a couple of things. But again, if you just look through the stuff that I've given you already, that's where we'll go with it next week. So you guys have a great weekend. Hugh?
Yeah, just read. So we're talking about the essays. They're like assorted essays that you sent in the previous email.
Yes, the one that I sent you guys most recently.
Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
and I may add to it. I am going to send you guys some music to listen to.
And-
Yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
Are you